The bill is originally introduced, Jim. Not only did it say, the actual text of the bill said, if you don't file this paperwork, the child shall be considered truant and the parent shall be subject to the truancy criminal proceedings, which in Illinois is a class 3 misdemeanor, $500 fine, 30 days in jail. So that was really the amazing thing, that with this language, if a school district were to misplace the paperwork, if you were to misplace the paperwork, if you were to maybe be traveling or have a death in the family or an illness and forgot to file the paperwork by the deadline, you shall be subject to the criminal truancy proceedings. Not one state does that.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, here with another episode of Homeschool Talks, where I get to talk to interesting people about interesting things in the world of homeschooling. Today, I'm very excited to be here with HSLDA Senior Counsel Will Estrada, who has been traveling North American continent, back and forth, up and down, north and south, east and west, in the cause of homeschool freedom. So welcome, Will.
Jim, great to be on. I'm glad I'm an interesting person.
Well, I have to say that. I have to say that about all my guests, but I really mean it with you. You're a very interesting person. And in that vein, why don't you tell our audience something about yourself personally before we get into the homeschool world of back and forth?
Well, I'll save then talking about being a homeschool graduate and homeschool dad to when we talk about the homeschool world. But I love to be outside. I love anything outdoors. We have a large garden. I built my wife a greenhouse in our backyard. We live right in the mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, overlooking Western Virginia. And recently saw you on one of our travels, actually. We were down on Cool Springs Battlefield along the Shenandoah River, and you had your binoculars and your dog, and you were out there eagle watching. So I guess we share the love of the outdoors.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your connection to homeschooling before you came to HSLDA.
Well, my parents homeschooled myself and my 7 younger siblings, so there were 8 of us. We started off in New York. And actually, my parents started homeschooling about a year after the law legalizing homeschooling in statute was passed in New York. My dad was a public school teacher. Mom gave up her career in IBM to stay home and homeschool all 8 of us. And then after a couple of years, we moved to northern Pennsylvania, and that's where I was homeschooled through the bulk of my K through 12 education. So in 2 of really the most highly regulated homeschool states, those are where I was homeschooled. Loved my homeschooling. My parents were early members of HSLDA, and so we would get the Court Report magazine, and I would read about the adventures and exploits of HSLDA lawyers. And really from an early age, I said, I want to be a lawyer and I want to work at HSLDA. And here I am kind of living the childhood dream.
Now, you weren't always a lawyer here at HSLDA. You've had a couple of stints with us over the years. How did you actually begin your career with us?
Well, I started off as a legal assistant in our legal department. I finished high school, then I took CLEP tests, then I went to Oak Brook College of Law, which is a primarily distance learning law school out in California. So while I was going through that, I said, I want to get really in-person work as you know, in the legal world. And so I sent in my resume to HSLDA and got a polite letter back saying, well, we don't really have any openings. Thanks for applying. Goodbye. And one of the really interesting things, Jim, is I kind of took that hard and kept on working on my legal career. And then this was 2003. So it was right as the war in Iraq was really kicking off, and all my friends were joining up, and really kind of had a crisis of what I should be doing. And so I went down to the recruiter's office, and they were overjoyed to see me. They said, well, you've got some college, you'll be a warrant officer, you'll fly helicopters. And I was like, sign me up. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I'd better take the weekend and pray about this. So before signing my name on the dotted line, I went home, and there was an email from HSLDA Senior Counsel and Director of our legal department, Scott Woodruff. And Scott, in the email, said, we just had someone leave unexpectedly. I see your resume from 6 months ago. Are you still interested in working? And could you be here next week? And really, it was one of those, my life could have gone one direction, but Providence, I believe God intervened, and immediately emailed back, absolutely, I'll be there. And that was January of 2004. So the rest is history.
Now, you took a detour from, the heaven-sanctioned work that we do here at HSLDA, and you spent a little sojourn kind of on the dark side. Tell us about that.
Well, that is a great story. So I started off as a legal assistant, then I finished law school. I passed the California bar, and for about 12 years, I was HSLDA's federal lobbyist. So I was right there in the capital, shining city on a hill, according to some, swamp, according to others, and enjoyed being HSLDA's lobbyist. But part of that was I got to see the work of the federal administration, the federal bureaucracies, Congress, and I was drawn to that. And so in 2018, an opportunity came up to go in as a career civil servant, a bureaucrat, some would call it, in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Office for Civil Rights. And so I distinctly remember telling you that and bidding farewell to all my colleagues here at HSLDA. And I really thought that would be my career. I enjoyed working in the federal government. I saw some really dedicated men and women and got to work alongside of them, enforcing federal civil rights laws, conscience and religious freedom laws, HIPAA, for example, in the sphere of health and human services. I served through the two administrations, the first Trump administration and then the beginning of the Biden administration, worked on some really interesting regulations. I was there during COVID, which was just, at least in health and human services, just such a time. I mean, we're working on vaccine issues, and we're working on civil rights issues. We're working from home. But the interesting thing was, after about 3.5 years, I really began to miss what I was doing at HSLDA. And I distinctly remember a time where I kind of, for the first time in my career, I said, I just feel jaded and burned out. And I'm like, I've only been doing this for 3 years. If I do this for another 30 years, what sort of curmudgeonly person am I going to be? I'm not even going to like myself. And you took me back, Jim, and gave up my government job and came back to the nonprofit world.
Yeah, and we're awfully glad you did, because while you were doing good work out in the federal government, we needed you here for such a time as this. And this time, this year, has been an exciting year in your work here at HSLDA. What's the most exciting thing about this year?
Oh, Jim, this year has been exciting, terrifying, crazy, inspiring all at once. And really, there are two things I've got to say. First of all, I love being at HSLDA. I always thought being the lobbyist for HSLDA in Washington, D.C. was a fun and fulfilling career, but doing the state work and the state contact attorney work, I mean, it's really the best job on earth. I get to help homeschool moms. I remember the sacrifice and dedication of my own mom, homeschooling us and really just giving us a great education. So being able to do that is just so inspiring. But this year in particular, there's been a very high and very low, and you wrote about this recently in your article about pendulum swinging, and these two states really exemplify that. The first one is Wyoming. Last year, we had a meeting with Homeschool Wyoming, our friends who lead the really vibrant home state organization in Wyoming, and we were looking ahead for 2025, and we said, well, what should we be working on? And kind of the consensus was, well, let's kind of do a Hail Mary. Let's try and remove the requirement that's been in the law since the 80s that homeschoolers file an annual letter of intent and curriculum with their local school district. Wyoming has great homeschool laws, but we all thought, well, let's try and make them better. Let's remove this requirement. And the interesting thing is, prior to this year, there are 11 states where there's not any annual notification. You have to educate your children, their educational neglect laws. You have to provide them with an education, but you don't have to check in with the government. And so we got this bill introduced. Homeschool Wyoming did a tremendous job on this. The homeschoolers came out, and the bill really sailed through, and we got it signed into law, HB 46, that you no longer need to check in with the local school district in order to homeschool. You are free to do it. So we moved to 12 states that are green on our map that have no annual filing or one-time filing with the state or with a local school district. So that was incredible. It was inspiring. It was exciting. It's actually the first time this has been removed by statute. Most of these other states, there's an old court case or a legal precedent, and so families have not needed to file. So that was the great thing. That was very exciting. This would have been an exciting enough year without anything else, just with Wyoming. But then right around the time that bill was moving, as you know, Jim, the other shoe dropped, and this was HB 2827 in Illinois. We had been warning that this could be coming. Last year, there was a ProPublica story that came out basically calling for additional regulation in homeschooling. We've talked about some of that and some model bills that are out there that would really roll back the clock on homeschooling freedom. And February 5th, the bill was dropped. It would have really made automatic criminal penalties if families forgot to file this annual filing. And the really what's even more shocking is it would have been Illinois, one of the best states to homeschool, going to one of the worst states to homeschool just in one legislative year. And that has really defined my work for this year. You got Wyoming on one side and then Illinois on the other side.
So Illinois on February 5th dropped this bill, and let's talk a little bit more about the details of the bill, because or begin with, in Illinois, what was the legal framework to homeschool before the bill was introduced?
So Illinois had one of the best legal frameworks, and really Illinois was a leader. I can say actually right now is a leader when it comes to parental rights and homeschooling. This goes all the way back to 1950. It predated really the modern homeschool movement, but there were these two parents. They were Seventh-day Adventists, and they had withdrawn their child from public school. They both had experience in teaching, and they said, we are going to provide our children with a quality education at home. And they were prosecuted despite all of this. And the case went up to the Illinois Supreme Court. 1950, People versus Levison. The Illinois Supreme Court established that not only could this family not face truancy charges, but that it doesn't really matter, the court said, whether the education is happening in a public school or in a home. So long as the child was being educated, they noted with approval the excellent education that the children were receiving, and they really established Illinois as a leader when it comes to, under the private school statute, families having the ability to educate their children. And so, Jim, the really fascinating thing is in the 70s and 80s, when the modern homeschool movement really kicked off, families were leaving adjoining states, Missouri, Indiana, some as far as Texas, and they were going to Illinois to be able to educate their children at home in a homeschool setting, technically defined as a private school under People versus Levison, without fear of prosecution. So that was the framework that had been there for 75 years, pretty much unchanged. There had been attempts most recently in 2011 to roll that back. 2011 was the last major time there was a bill introduced to try and roll back homeschool freedom in Illinois. Scott Woodruff went out there and gave a masterful testimony. 4,000 homeschoolers came out, and the bill died in committee.
So Illinois is one of the 11 states before Wyoming, and now it's one of the 12 states. An article came out in the fall last year suggesting that homeschoolers need to be more strictly regulated. Go through some of the details of the bill itself.
Yeah, so there are kind of two bills because the bill is so I'll talk about the bill is introduced and then the bill that most recently on April 9th was passed out of committee and which is currently pending on the floor. The bill is introduced, I mean it was a 45-page bill, and it's been interesting because supporters of the bill had said, this is just a form, so we know how many homeschoolers there are, so kids don't fall through the crack. And the bill was premised on two mistaken assumptions, Jim. The first one was that homeschooling is without any rules in Illinois. And as we already talked about, there are educational neglect laws, there are truancy laws. People versus Levison established that you had to teach your kids the general subjects that are in public school. You had to provide an education commensurate with what the children would receive in a public or private school. And actually, importantly, People versus Levison also said if a family was challenged about the sufficiency of their education, the family had the burden of proof in showing that they were educating their children. So the first mistaken premise that the bill had is that there are no rules, because that's just not the case. But the second premise, and this really hits close to home and really offends me as someone who was homeschooled, who homeschools his children. My wife is a homeschool graduate. We homeschool because we love our children. That's why people homeschool their kids, is the bill was premised on the assumption that kids who are being homeschooled are at greater risk of abuse and neglect and that we can't trust their parents. There are peer-reviewed studies that talk about how there's no evidence of children being at greater risk of abuse or neglect if they're being homeschooled. And incidentally enough, Illinois is tragically number 5 in the nation for child maltreatment fatalities. There are numerous investigative news stories that have come out in the past 3 or 4 years that DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services in Illinois, is an agency in crisis about foster children, children who are known to the agency. Almost 100 children die every year in Illinois from abuse and neglect, which is just a staggering and heartbreaking statistic. And these are kids who are known to DCFS. And so even on the own statistics of some of the organizations that are behind HB 2827, homeschooling is the safest way for children to be protected. And what's really disconcerting is the bill, instead of reforming DCFS, which is so needed in Illinois, goes after homeschoolers. So those are the two mistaken assumptions, but the two big things the bill as originally introduced would have done is it put mandatory criminal penalties on a family who failed to file this new homeschool declaration form.
Now, let me just stop you there. So you are a contact attorney for more states than just Illinois, right?
Yes, 9 states and DC.
And so there are kind of two sources for paperwork issues in lots of states. One of those would be, sometimes homeschooling parents forget to do their paperwork.
I think I have a stack of bills I've forgotten to pay on my desk.
Right.
So,
and another reason that paperwork becomes an issue is, surprisingly, public schools and other bureaucracies sometimes misplace or forget or don't do their side of the paperwork correctly. Is that? Am I saying an accurate thing?
We see that all the time. And so the bill is originally introduced, Jim. Not only did it say, the actual text of the bill said, if you don't file this paperwork, the child shall be considered truant and the parent shall be subject to the truancy criminal proceedings, which in Illinois is a class 3 misdemeanor, $500 fine, 30 days in jail. Let's talk about, for example, a single mom who maybe is holding down a job and forgot to file the paperwork. If she gets put in jail, the kids are going to be removed and placed in temporary foster care.
Now, in your experience in other states, when there's a paperwork mix-up, either on, coming from either side, what usually happens?
Well, when a school district either loses the paperwork, I've got a case in Pennsylvania right now where social services is coming to say, where's this paperwork? The family sometimes will get referred for truancy proceedings. And it's not through any fault of their own. We always tell families, file your withdrawal paperwork or your notice of intent paperwork via certified mail, because it's so often that school districts lose this. So
in my experience, sometimes what happens is, oh, here's the paperwork. Okay, thanks.
Right.
Instead of criminal prosecution. And that was sort of a dramatic change that no other state really does that, do they?
Not one state. So that was really the amazing thing, that with this language, if a school district were to misplace the paperwork, if you were to misplace the paperwork, if you were to maybe be traveling or have a death in the family or an illness and forgot to file the paperwork by the deadline, you shall be subject to the criminal truancy proceedings. Not one state does that. And so it was draconian what was in this first draft of the bill. Another thing was there had to be portfolio reviews. The families had to keep the portfolio, and there was a sentence that said that there could be an investigation for any other purpose. So the really interesting thing, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of us here, Jim, is we had, particularly in Chicago, some of the Black and Latino homeschool leaders really said this is a terrible bill. There was a press conference. The opposition was bipartisan to this. And so in response to it, at first the sponsor and the supporters of the bill doubled down and said, no, this is fine. This is just the same as any other state, even though, as you really illustrated, not one state criminalizes this failure to file paperwork. But at the last minute, they said, all right, we don't have the votes. And so they substituted. It was Amendment 002. It came in mere hours before a committee meeting. And they dropped the shall be considered truant and shall be subject to the criminal truancy proceedings, and instead put in, if you don't file the paperwork, you shall be referred to the state attorney. So it was maybe a little better from a litigation perspective of a judge isn't going to say, well, I'm really sorry, but it says my hands are tied, and gives a little bit of discretion to the state attorney. But really, it's the same situation. Vulnerable families all of a sudden being referred for criminal prosecution because maybe a school district mishandled paperwork or got lost in the mail, or a family forgot to file.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because families in the Chicago area are really kind of just discovering homeschooling. And I guess what I mean to say is there are, homeschooling as a educational choice is growing in Black and Hispanic families at a much higher pace than other families, and particularly in Chicago, that was becoming the case. And some friends of ours who are homeschool leaders in Chicago became particularly invested and involved in the opposition to this bill. Talk about them.
Yeah, it's been really exciting, Jim, to see the minority community, just especially post-COVID, embrace homeschooling. It was funny when I was being homeschooled, my Puerto Rican descent. We were really the only minority family we knew in all of Pennsylvania. There was one other family, a Black family, where they were in high school debate with us as well. But we were really the only minorities that we knew in the entire region. But today, some studies say that up to 40% of children who are being homeschooled are Black and brown. So it's been really exciting to see the growth, particularly in the Chicago area. And these leaders, there's a whole bunch of them: Latasha Fields, Chris and Aziza Butler, Chantel Moore, others who have really taken up the mantle in Chicago in particular. And they have relationships with the legislators there in a way that not everyone does. One of the most powerful moments in this battle against HB 2827 have been during the two hearings. The first one was on March 19th. I testified there in that hearing. It was a marathon, hours-long hearing. But right next to me was Aziza Butler, who is a homeschool mom from Chicago. She's a former Chicago public school educator, and she has said one of the reasons why she chose to homeschool her children was because of what she saw when she was a Chicago public school educator. And she spoke truth to power in that hearing on March 19th. And then in the more recent hearing on the Amendment 002, this is the bill that currently is potentially could move, or maybe is dead. We're still waiting to figure out. We'll know more by the time this podcast is published. At the recent April 9th hearing, her husband, Chris Butler, who is a pastor in Chicago, he spoke again, just like his wife, really from the heart of why he and Aziza are homeschooling their kids. And both Chris and Aziza and some other homeschool parents in Illinois, they did a really powerful press conference a couple weeks ago right in Chicago. There were Black legislators, Democrat legislators who came out and spoke passionately. One of them, LaShawn Ford, he said, "I can't vote for this bill because, as written, it represents a pipeline to the criminal justice system for parents who just want to love their children and homeschool their children." And he said, he really illustrated just in one sentence how bad HB 2827 is.
Yeah, so that by the time this podcast is published, we'll know, I guess, if the bill is dead, or if, I think somebody referred to it as having zombie-like qualities. It may come back into the post-Easter session of the House. What do you think is the single most what's the driving force behind this bill in particular and others like it?
Yeah. Jim, as you and our listeners know, this isn't the only bill that we fought this year. One other one that really could have gone very far, but thankfully didn't, was SB 1031 here in Virginia, which would have eliminated the religious exemption option, which is how my wife and I homeschool our kids. But the motivation behind both HB 2827, SB 1031, a few other bills we've seen in other states, is really a clash of worldviews of who is better able to protect and make decisions for children. Is it the state? Is it faceless bureaucrats? Or is it loving parents who sacrificed their time, their treasure, their very lives for their children? And, the beating heart here at HSLDA and organizations like ICHE in Illinois, which have done just so much work against HB 2827, and HEAV here in Virginia, which helped in the fight against SB 1031, is that these are inalienable, fundamental rights given to us by our Creator, that the family came first, pre-political is the term, and government came out of it, and nothing should come between that parent and child relationship. And that's why it's just so passionate to me and to the supporters of homeschool freedom as we testify against these bills, as we see thousands of families coming out and shutting down the Capitol in Illinois to peacefully protest, but firmly protest against these bills that really come between the parent and child relationship.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit more, the difference in the worldviews. I mean, there's sort of I think there was a child abuse pediatrician in Chicago who said something like, if this bill will protect only one child, everybody should be willing to be subjected to this additional regulation.
Yeah, we've heard that several times in the testimony by the supporters as well. And there's just so many responses. One of the most primary ones is, I remember the 1979 Supreme Court decision, Parham versus JR. And this was not, a conservative Supreme Court. This was the Supreme Court, most of the justices in Parham versus JR who ruled, who said this quote, and I'm going to say in a second, they also ruled just a few years earlier with the Roe v. Wade decision. So this wasn't like some right-wing Antonin Scalia type of court. But the court said in Parham versus JR in 1979 that it's a statist notion to believe that because some parents abuse and neglect children, that all parents should be regulated by the state. They called it a statist notion. And I always tell people...
Well, they finished up by saying that statist notion is repugnant to American tradition.
Right. So statist notion, repugnant. Thanks for getting the rest of that.
Well,
quote,
I just love to say repugnant. Repugnant.
But I mean, that's what the court said. And so when I hear child abuse pediatricians, who we could do a whole talk about that and how, they've disrupted families, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, sort of thing. We could do a whole talk about that, but they forget. I remember the 2006 Law Review article, Storming the Castle to Save the Children by Doreen Lambert-Koebele. And she made the argument that we're harming children, that we're adding trauma to children by this whole approach of storm the castle to save the children, break down the Fourth Amendment, no Fourth Amendment exception in child welfare investigations. And what are we actually doing to children? Many of these allegations are false as well. But, it's a statist notion that's morally repugnant. And I know your heart, Jim, and every homeschool family, people who abuse and neglect children should be punished to the full extent of the law. But we don't trump loving families just because of one or two people who've done horrific things.
So you mentioned two state organizations, the group in Illinois, the Illinois Christian Home Educators and Home Educators Association of Virginia. What's the, in your experience this year especially, how important do those organizations, how important is the role those organizations play in these kind of moments where there's legislation, but throughout the year as well?
I can't really overstate the importance, Jim, of these state organizations. Let me talk about both specifically. So in Illinois, when the ProPublica story came out last June, I believe it was, calling for greater regulation for homeschooling, ICHE and HSLDA, we immediately began preparing. And the preparation that ICHE has done that really has been instrumental in helping to stop HB 2827, at least thus far, goes back decades. They just had their 35th annual Cherry Pie Day, where homeschoolers come out, they bring cherry pies to the Capitol, they give them to the legislators. Funny story, Oregon, the ocean organization, they have an apple pie day. And I was once about maybe a decade ago, I was speaking there, fly into the Capitol, and I'm checking into my hotel, and this guy looks like, the stereotypical hipster in Portland. We're not in Portland, it's in Salem. And I'm checking, and he's like, "What brings you out from D.C. to Salem, dude?" And I told him, "Well, I'm here for the apple pie day at the Capitol at the homeschoolers." He's like, "Oh, do you throw apple pies at the legislators, dude?" And I was like, "No, we just give them to the legislators and thank them for protecting homeschooling." He's like, "Well, that's just not as exciting, dude." It was really funny, but like in Oregon, in Illinois, they give them as gifts to the legislators and they say, just protect homeschooling, leave us alone, we've got great laws. And so those relationships that ICHE has built, they have been absolutely essential as we battle HB 2827. One other thing, Jim, on March 19th, when Aziza and I and others testified against HB 2827 for the first hearing, ICHE got somewhere between 5,500 and 8,500 homeschoolers to the Capitol. The only reason we know how many people came, because it was countless busloads. I've never seen anything like it, Jim. Every floor, every stairwell, every room was filled up with homeschoolers. Homemade signs talking about this bill. We filled up the hearing room. We only seated about 100 people. An hour and a half, by 6:50 in the morning, an hour and a half before the hearing started, the room was full. But we got 3 different responses from the officials at the Capitol. They had to shut down access to the Capitol. Fire marshal shut it down because there were too many inside. One official said they shut down access at 5,000 people. One official said they shut down access at 6,000 people. One official said they don't only shut the doors at 8,000 people. So somewhere in that number, but there were 500 moms, dads, grandparents, kids who never were able to get into the Capitol. And rather than leave, they stood outside with their homemade signs. They weren't chanting. They weren't yelling. They were just thanking the legislators who walked by and saying, please oppose HB 2827. And ICHE was the organization that got the buses, that brought those homeschoolers there. One other funny story about the local homeschoolers in Illinois, during the hearing, and I didn't find this out until afterwards, the women's restrooms ran out of toilet paper because there were so many thousands of people there. And this is probably some sort of union violation, but the homeschool moms rallied. I don't know if they went out to Costco real fast or if they found a storeroom, but they restocked every single restroom with toilet paper. And it's really ironic because, while this bill is being debated that could put homeschool moms and dads and parents and guardians in prison for failing to file a piece of paperwork, these homeschool moms mobilized and rallied, to help everyone, staffers, legislators, visitors to the Capitol, with something as pedestrian as toilet paper in the restroom. And then, HEAV in Virginia has done the same thing. SB 1031 did not go nearly as far as HB 2827, but ICHE and HEAV and so many state organizations around the nation, their ability to talk to the grassroots and get them into a hearing is absolutely essential.
So, what's up next for you, Will?
Well, my frequent flyer miles have been increasing.
Yeah. And you give those all back to the company, right?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I know the Chicago airport, Chicago O'Hare, very well. There's a giant dinosaur that you can see the fossil. There also is the F-4F Wildcat fighter flown by the Air Force or Navy pilot off the aircraft carrier, Lieutenant O'Hare as well. And that's really just meaningful. I'm kind of a World War II history buff. And I found that recently in one of my connections through Chicago and spent a good 30 minutes until my phone pinged me that I needed to be rushing to go and get my connection. So, Jim, at this point, we are waiting to see. We're working closely with Kirk Smith. I call him Captain Kirk with ICHE, and Jeff Lewis and the entire ICHE team. We're coordinating with the private school community in Illinois because HB 2827 will affect private schools as well. Not these are traditional brick and mortar private schools, not just homeschools, but I have several other trips already scheduled to fly out to Illinois, and there'll be more if the bill does kind of resurrect zombie-like from the Rules Committee where it's currently pending. Of course, I have travel in other states. I just got back from Pennsylvania. CHAP, the homeschool organization up there, did a Capitol Day, and we had about 500 people there in the Capitol. It's a beautiful Capitol. Of course, I love the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, having been homeschooled most of my life there. And so it's exciting what I get to do here at HSLDA. A lot of travel is involved, a lot of working with just incredible homeschool moms, dads, grandparents, volunteers, and organizations. And I love that I get to do this on behalf of HSLDA for homeschoolers all around the nation.
Well, I want to end on this note. Here at HSLDA, we're a Christian organization, and we gather every Tuesday and Thursday mornings as a staff and pray about such things. Sometimes it's illness amongst our staff or relatives, and oftentimes we pray about pending issues in the states, like the bills in Virginia and Illinois. And that's just been very important. How have you seen the Lord's hand work through your work this year?
Jim, it really is powerful. And it's very hard sometimes to put it into words, but just even with HB 2827 being introduced in Illinois, a state where we had built relationships with people in the Black community and the Latino homeschool community, where they are able to talk to legislators on the ground, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, who are in their churches, has been miraculous. If this bill had been introduced in other states, some of those relationships, which really are just providential, may not have been there. And so it's been incredible to see the goodness of God. And I always remember when we're fighting these bills, a verse that I recall very often is in Lamentations, and the prophet Jeremiah writes, and it's a very sad book of the Bible. The Jewish people had been conquered by the Babylonians, and Jeremiah was basically kidnapped by rebels and brought to Egypt against his will. And he writes, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, for his compassions fail not. Great are your mercies. And even in this battle with HB 2827 and with other bills around the country, we see the goodness of God and the mercies of God. The fact that the bill as we're recording, still has not even passed the House of Representatives in the state of Illinois is kind of a miracle. When the bill was first introduced, we were told by people in the know, don't even try and fight it in the House. It's going to pass the House. Let's focus on the Senate where we've got a better shot. I was talking to an Illinois Senate staffer the other day, and he was telling me it's amazing that the bill is struggling so much in the House. We kind of want to fight it in the Senate, but we may not even get the chance to fight in the Senate. I was like, well, we don't want to have to fight in the Senate. We'd rather beat it in the House, but it's good to know we've got a good chance in the Senate as well. And so I see it just with flight connections. I see it with the people who have risen up to fight the bill. And it's a powerful reminder, Jim, that as we read in Ephesians 6, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. And so take on the whole armor of God that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. And I love that here at HSLDA, we get to pray together, to pray for homeschool parents in Illinois and Virginia and Wyoming and other states, because it really is a reminder that what we do matters in eternity.
So we at HSLDA stand here to roll back barriers and to prevent new barriers from being introduced because we love children, because we think that parents, for the most part, are the best curators of their child's education. And that's why we do the work we do. That's why we celebrate when states like Wyoming remove barriers, and why we work so hard in places like Illinois to prevent new barriers from being erected. So joining me today, Senior Counsel Will Estrada. I'll give you the last word before we sign off.
Well, it's a reminder of build those relationships with state legislators, keep homeschooling with excellence, and always remember that the most important thing is the love that you show to your children in your homeschool program.
Well, thank you, Will, for joining me today, and thank you all for listening to Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you would like to get upcoming podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox, sign up for the Homeschool Talks email list. And if you're not a member of HSLDA yet, we'd love to have you join us. We consider every member to be a partner with us in all of these things that we've talked about today. And you can do that by going to homeschooltalks.com/join. Thanks once again for joining us.
Today's episode is made possible by HSLDA's Generation Joshua program. Do you have a student who wants to make a difference in our nation? Generation Joshua empowers teens to make the most of their citizenship through local clubs, immersive simulations, online courses, and real-life campaign experiences. For more information, visit generationjoshua.org. That's generationjoshua.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.